World history. The rising tide of slavery in the 1500s presented by olive tree education. Slavery is an ancient practice, woven into the fabric of human civilization for thousands of years. From the laborers of ancient Egypt to the servants of medieval Europe, the concept of owning another human being was not new. How did the world come to accept the trading of human lives as a necessity? Unlike earlier forms of servitude, the 1500s saw slavery become a global enterprise, driven by economic necessity, religious justification, and the insatiable demands of European empires. The key question we want to explore is an important one. What beliefs and justifications fueled this inhumane practice? Step back in time with us as we unravel the origins of the transatlantic slave trade and the twisted logic that supported it. Welcome to the untold story of slavery in the 1500s. In the 1500s, beliefs about slavery varied widely across different cultures and regions. Here are some key points that shaped the early dynamics of slavery. Part 1. Economic necessity. Many Europeans saw slavery as an economic necessity, especially for labor-intensive industries like sugar, tobacco, and later cotton. The transatlantic slave trade began in the early 1500s, driven by the demand for cheap labor in the New World. For instance, the Portuguese established sugar plantations on the island of São Tomé, relying heavily on enslaved African labor. Did you know? The transatlantic slave trade led to the forced migration of millions of Africans, with an estimated 12.5 million people being transported to the Americas between the 16th and 19th centuries. Part 2. Religious justifications. Some Europeans justified slavery through religious beliefs, arguing that it was acceptable to enslave non-Christians in order to convert them. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull, Dum Diversa, which granted Portugal the right to enslave non-Christians. This decree was used to justify the enslavement of Africans and indigenous peoples in the Portuguese and Spanish empires. Did you know? Some early Christian missionaries, like Bartolomé de las Casas, initially supported the enslavement of Africans as a means to protect indigenous peoples. However, he later became a vocal advocate against all forms of slavery, arguing that it was incompatible with Christian teachings. Part 3. Social hierarchies. In many African societies, slavery existed long before European contact, but it was often different from the chattel slavery that developed in the Americas. For example, in the Kingdom of Congo, enslaved people could sometimes marry into their owners' families and gain social mobility. Did you know? The Kingdom of Ndongo in present-day Angola was involved in the slave trade with the Portuguese, capturing and selling prisoners of war and criminals to European traders. Part 4. Legal and institutional frameworks. By the late 1500s, European powers had begun to formalize the legal and institutional frameworks for slavery. The Spanish crown established the asiento system, which granted licenses to private companies to transport enslaved Africans to Spanish colonies, formalizing the transatlantic slave trade. At the same time, the Spanish crown issued the Laws of the Indies, which included regulations on the treatment of enslaved indigenous peoples in the Americas, though these laws were often ignored. These beliefs and practices laid the groundwork for the extensive and brutal system of slavery that would dominate the Atlantic world in the following centuries. Did you know? Enslaved Africans often resisted slavery through various means, including revolts on slave ships, work slowdowns, and maintaining their cultural practices despite efforts to suppress them. While the transatlantic slave trade dominated the 1500s, it's crucial to remember that slavery was a global phenomenon. Understanding the justifications for slavery helps us comprehend how such a practice could become so widespread and deeply rooted in different societies.